Welcome. So I'm Deb Socia, the Executive Director of Next Century Cities. I work with cities, towns, and counties all over the country that either have or want to have fast, affordable, reliable broadband. We're a nonprofit. It's free to join. If you're interested, you can find our website. So interestingly enough, I have the honor of being the moderator of the first panel of the conference and the last panel of the conference. And this is a really interesting conversation, and I'm excited for it to happen, and it is a debate. And so the only thing that would disappoint me today is if we all agreed. So the goal here is for us to give a variety of opinions so that you learn what both sides of this argument might be, and so that you can be more informed when you're making decisions. So we're going to start with a 2-minute overview from each of our panelists, and then we'll do a quick question and answer, and then we'll go to the audience for questions, so please plan on asking questions. And then I'll have a final question at the end as a wrap-up. So without further ado, let me introduce this really cool panel. We have Deacon from KC Digital Drive, Ernie Staten from Fairlawn, Ohio, Lori Sherwood from VantagePoint, and Diane Kruse from NEO. And I'm going to give you each 2 minutes to give us a little bit of an overview of what you do and your viewpoint.
Cool. Thanks, Deb. Aaron Deacon, KC Digital Drive. We're probably a little bit of an outlier on this panel. We don't do a ton with RFPs. Our organization was founded to sort of take advantage of Google Fiber coming to Kansas City. We're a nonprofit based in Kansas City. We do a lot of work in community engagement. My professional background is in market research, product innovation, and strategic planning. So have sort of taken that expertise and put it in a civic context. So we kind of had a new to market product offering that didn't really have a business plan. The role, I guess, on this panel. So through doing this work in Kansas City, we put together a playbook, and we've done a lot of, we do sort of community validation work, really from an outcomes perspective, and some community visioning work. We've done some workshops for some other cities in conjunction with other partners, kind of modeled on the work that we've done in Kansas City. And a lot of other cities have come to us and said, oh, how are you doing the thing that you're doing? So you start to slide into, not a broadband network build RFP, but how do you do this sort of community engagement piece and think about the community impact that you're hoping to achieve from the infrastructure. And then sort of through that, we've actually responded to a couple RFPs over the past couple years, one in Fort Collins and one in Topeka very recently. Didn't get either of them, weren't quite responding to what the RFP was asking for. We can talk more about that as we get into it, but that's sort of our vantage point on this process.
Hi, I'm Ernie Staten, Deputy Service Director for the City of Fairlawn. So a service director, what they actually do is they're in charge of all the infrastructure that is maintained by a city, whether that be road, sewers, or even buildings. And in my case, I have all those under my responsibilities, but I've also added a fiber to the home project. So we actually have a project that's off the ground. We have around 450 customers right now. We also have another 40 customers that are wireless. And so I think that's what I'm bringing to this panel is the fact that we already went through this whole RFP process, and we did it wrong like every other community, and I think I can add some insight into, the first thing that is necessary is figuring out exactly what the community needs, and then secondly, figuring out a game plan of your engineering. So I come from a civil background, but this is no different than any other civil project. You're putting the infrastructure in the ground. The civil project would say you must engineer before you do anything else. So I think that's what I can add to this panel here today.
Hello, good afternoon. I know we stand between you all and happy hour, so hopefully this will be an invigorating conversation. My name is Lori Sherwood. I'm the Director of Broadband Development with VantagePoint Solutions, and my background actually is very much in municipal space. I've worked both for local government for many years and was on the drafting side of RFPs. And so I have that insight, as well as now my position at VantagePoint. I basically do a lot with municipal governments. I'm the one that's drafting proposal responses, in charge of those for municipalities. So I think that there's a lot of lessons learned, best practices. There's also, I think it's interesting for you all that are in the on the government side of things to hear kind of the vendor's perspective, and what our thoughts are and what may help you better work in your RFI, RFP proposals and your procurement processes. I think there's some things that we've learned along the way that I'd like to share with you today on that. So.
Good afternoon, I'm Diane Kruse. I am with NeoConnect. We are a consulting firm that works with local governments, municipalities, counties, school districts on broadband planning. And we often serve as the owner's representative when a local government would like to implement their strategy. So we create the strategy, and in many cases we also implement and oversee the construction potentially of the network. In that process, we're involved often in collaboration and in negotiating public-private partnerships or partnerships with other entities. We're also involved often in crafting the request for information and the request for proposal. And so we, I guess, bring the viewpoint of working with many municipalities and counties on that process of trying to eventually get what they need. So they can build the network. And then, because we're like every organization, we're also responding to requests for information and requests for proposals to engage with us from a consulting standpoint. So perhaps I bring that view as well.
Thank you. So we're going to focus primarily here on RFIs, requests for information. And so I'm going to start with this question. From your perspective, when should a municipality not write an RFI? And are there alternatives they should consider? And so I'm going to let you please make it a conversation.
So I would say that an RFI is a great tool to use when you're not really sure what you want, and or when you're not really sure who potentially might show up as a partner or as a vendor that could help bring something to the table that you might need. I think it's really important to specify what the purpose of the RFI is. So I'll give an example. When we were implementing the Region 10 project, that project is about collaboration and partnerships. And we wrote a request for information that was specific to the question of what fiber assets or conduit assets do you as a service provider or as a power utility or any other entity, what assets do you have, and would you be willing to contribute those assets? And that RFI process was really effective because we got a very specific answer. So I think in that case, we wanted the ability to negotiate after responses were received. We wanted the ability to not necessarily award that to one vendor. We wanted to be able to work with anybody who potentially showed up with assets that they would be willing to provide. And so that served a very specific purpose, and I think that was a really effective tool.
So I would disagree a little bit with that, in that I think that RFIs, from a vendor standpoint, it's very difficult to respond to RFIs that are open-ended when you're just looking for information and you're not exactly sure what you want. It takes a lot of time and effort to put together a proposal, and oftentimes the responses that you're going to get back are going to be all over the board. And we've seen communities that have, particularly in the public-private partnership arena, where you're trying to find a public-private partner, communities where they toss out all the responses because it wasn't what they were looking for. And so there's a couple of points here. One is that before you put out an RFI, especially for a P3 type of model, it's in your best interest to try and meet with providers first. Try and find some of these folks in your area, in your region, to meet with them. Do your due diligence and see what information you can glean from one-on-one meetings before you put out your RFI. That will help you craft it to be more specific so that the proposals that you get at the end will be more in line with what you're looking for, and you'll know from a vendor standpoint what their limitations are as well. Too often we see in RFIs kind of requirements or things that are not really viable from a vendor standpoint. And so it's good to know those before you go into drafting the RFI. So really, I would say for an alternative approach, I would say do your due diligence, figure out what your community needs are first, and then before you spend the time and effort and money to put together an RFI.
I think I would agree with everything that Lori just said, maybe with a little bit of an exception to it. I think the way that I see the RFIs that are out there today, it's almost in a situation where they're looking for it to be free. So it's not, none of this process is free. You know, you need an engineering design. You need to work with a consultant to get your community to the political will of your community. That's all going to cost something. And what I see in RFIs, it feels like it's asking for a lot for that they don't want to pay for those. So I'm not into an RFI personally anyways. I think RFPs are the better way to go. You're at a better point then, but that's what I see going on with the ones that are out there. It just looks like they're so open-ended that it feels like they don't plan to spend money. And I can tell you from my personal experience, it's going to cost some money to stay viable in your community. None of this is going to be for free. So if anyone has a plan out there that it's a free process, it's not, and you need to determine whether you're going to lead or follow, I guess. And if you follow, that you may have to take whatever is left over. Leading, at least you know where you're at, where you stand.
Can I respond to that just quickly? So I think it's really important to, first of all, discuss what the purpose of the RFI is. So with that specific purpose of identifying where there were assets that we could potentially use, that was a very specific purpose, and therefore that was very effective. I agree with both of you that if we're going to do a public-private partnership, you need to do a lot of homework before you issue an RFI for a public-private partnership. That's a very specific end goal. And if it's just open-ended, it's a long conversation to figure out where you even begin and what this could potentially look like. So if we're talking about a public-private partnership around a ubiquitous broadband strategy, I've seen it in RFI used for the purpose of just identifying who's out there and what the options are when perhaps the city council doesn't know what they want. And I agree that slows the process down. It can be too open-ended, it can be overwhelming, and maybe you don't get the quality of responses that you need to actually form a partnership. So in that case, I think it's important to say, do your research. What assets does the city bring to the table, potentially for a public-private partnership? What is the city willing to do? How much control does the city need? How much is the city willing to spend to still maintain some control over a potential private-public partnership? So I think it's really important in this discussion that we separate out what the purpose of the RFI is from what you eventually will get as responses. So responding to a public-private partnership RFI is very different than putting it out there, who has dark fiber assets out in the ground. That's a pretty specific question. I've seen an RFI used in planning of specifically asking the service providers in the service territory, where are you planning to spend money to improve infrastructure, and how can the local municipality contribute capital so that you actually do that now versus in 5 years? So again, that's a really specific question, and I think that can be then very effective.
So that good. That's good, because I was going to actually have you all answer what we were talking about by RFI, more specifically, because I think it can mean a lot of things. And I'll say, I mean, as sort of an outsider to telco, and to some degree, or actually a very large degree, to city procurement, the whole idea of an RFI was weird to me when I first started encountering them. And I get it, that the need for information. So if you say RFI, request for information, very broadly, kind of grab bag catch all. I've got an analogy, I'll give it in a minute, from a federal sort of request for information. I think, certain kinds of information you need. And I think if the city puts information out there, especially that wasn't out there before, that can be sort of an interesting hook to get people interested. But so thinking really broadly, when I just hear RFI and I think of it in this sort of amorphous, we don't really know what we're doing. We kind of are interested in broadband. We think there's, some people are doing Muni out there. We'd like to know if there are private partners that could maybe come, or maybe some of the incumbents will do something, different if we use the word RFI. I think that's a tough sell. And you do see some people doing that, and then you read them, and you're like, okay, I don't really know who's responding to this and where this is going to go. The FCC maybe 2 years ago had this process that was called the Wireless Model City, and they said we want to have a model city for wireless deployments. Oh, that's kind of interesting. So we submitted a comment. We were only a handful of cities that actually responded to this. And I flew out for a kind of day-long workshop. They're like, so we want, we need just city-scale test beds for wireless research, and we really want, the private community to get involved. We think this could be really interesting. I'm like, okay, well, what do you mean? What are you talking about? When you say a test bed, what kind of projects are you talking about testing? Like, oh, it could really be anything. It could be any spectrum. We've got all this unused, sort of bottleneck spectrum at a federal standpoint. It could be, 80, 90 gigahertz. It could be 2.5. It's really broad. I'm like, well, so what are you asking people to do? And they had a hard time answering it. And so finally I was like, so when you say to do projects, are you talking about a 6-month, $50,000 kind of pilot project, or, a 10-year, $500 million project? Could be any of them. Let's the whole range. We're open to everything. I'm like, well, if that's your range, no wonder there's a lot of people that you'd like to see here that aren't coming here. I think for cities, you've got to kind of have the same orientation. If you want sort of to know the full range of possibilities, that's kind of a dumb reason to put out an RFI. And also, there's so much information out there now. And so this has kind of been the other thing for me coming into broadband. Even now, 5 years later after I've started doing this, the wealth of information that is just accessible is tremendous. I mean, Deb's organization, for one, which has been collecting stuff for a couple of years, Broadband USA that NTIA has sort of set up as a city consulting service. I mean, just the conference circuit in general, the number of cities that are willing to share and the number of people that are do this, and it's a very open community, so you can really understand a lot of what your options and possibilities are. And I guess the last thing I would say is a lot of the people that don't do that work, maybe just aren't quite motivated enough to do that work. You've said this earlier in my session, a lot of talk about political will. And the communities that have been most impressive to me are the ones where there's a city council person who's going to these conferences. And they're like, well, I'm just going to go to broadband communities because I know there's a lot going on out there. Or, I'm going to go to Mountain Connect or wherever it is and start learning about this. Virgil came to our event and he brought, city council people back from Montrose. He's like, listen, you gotta see sort of what other people are doing. And that's all out there to see. That just seems like a more effective way, first to learn what you need to learn, but also indicates the kind of commitment that you need to have within your city in order to make anything happen afterwards.
Thank you. So next question. There seems to be an explosion of RFIs right now in this space. My question is, are you seeing action on the other side of those? In other words, the RFI goes out, they get a response. Is there action happening? Does it lead to a next step? And so I'd love to hear your opinion on that.
No. And I think this is partly why the vendor community is becoming more, selective in responding to RFIs, because so many of them, you go down this RFI rabbit hole and you don't get out of it. And it can delay and delay and delay a community, and sometimes it is kind of a bridge to nowhere. I cannot think of anywhere currently where, and I could be wrong, and I'd love to know if anyone out here has an example of where an RFI process led to the development of a public-private partnership. Because this is really where the RFI strategy is being utilized the most. Sort of Google was the one who came out, and when they were looking to start their project, 2009, and they started the RFI craze when they put out the RFI and asked communities to respond to it. And they got all this free market research from all of these thousands of communities that gave them information for them that helped develop their plan. But I think that because we've seen communities where it's a year and a half later and there has been no action. And that's a long time for a vendor to put in a proposal and wait to hear something or have conversations. It's just a long time, and so I have not seen this used effectively.
I think that it's getting saturated, and so I think it's going to become less effective. But I can point to a number of projects that have had successful outcomes. We just finished a study for Garfield County and Mesa County, and we did include an RFI in that process, and we had 2 companies that came forward that had fiber assets in the ground in the service territory and are now in negotiations with 2 of the communities to do a fiber to the home strategy. And that process was very informative, and because it was an RFI, it allowed the cities the flexibility to then enter into negotiations and have more of a dialogue rather than a set response. So it has been effective there. It was used in the Southwest Colorado Council of Governments. We did a broadband plan for them. We included an RFI process in that. I think we're learning that we can be more effective, but some good takeaways from that process was there were several service providers that took it to heart. They are providing services in the service territory. They provided very specific information in terms of how broadband services could be improved with local government participation. And so that was very effective. It was an informative and good takeaways and actionable items that came out from those studies. I do worry that this process is being saturated. So, think about it. Across the country, there are thousands of municipalities that are realizing that they need to come up with a strategy to provide ubiquitous gigabit broadband to their constituents. And on the other side of that, there's a handful of companies that would be able to provide and respond to that RFI. So there's thousands of municipalities that are seeking the services of a select few, 5 companies. And that's not going to work, is it? It's just, those companies are saturated. They can be very selective in which communities they engage with. We've seen it in Boulder. We've seen it in Fort Collins, where they've gone through this RFI process, they've gone through the RFP process, and they're nowhere closer to having a solution that could be implemented. So I think my answer to that question is yes, it's saturated, and it's going to probably become less effective. So rather than throw it out, what do we need to do to the RFI process to make it more effective? I think the first thing that we need to do is that we need to, as consultants, meet with those service providers or potential partners ahead of time. We also need to do our research on what is it that the city wants to do and what's their appetite for investment. How much is it going to cost? And what are they asking of the service provider? What is the benefit potentially for the service provider to engage with this particular project? And you have to put it out there before you issue an RFI or an RFP. That's when it could potentially be more effective. And so, you really have to lay the foundation, do your legwork, have a specific ask that you can use as a starting point, and then I think it might be more effective.
Do you think that part of that process can be actually breaking down what you want to do into just smaller proposal stages? Because it seems like there's enough information, I mean, like, even in what you're saying, like, maybe there's just a small little chunk of work that actually needs to be done, so you bid that out as a...
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. So just maybe to give an overview of what are we talking about. So often public-private partnership might be, there's a lot of this happening, I think, in the industry where a municipality says, okay, we're going to give you some of our fiber assets. We want you to come in and build a ubiquitous broadband network to serve all of our homes and businesses with gigabit broadband. And we want you to be the service provider. We want you to provide capital to build out. Maybe the municipality will provide some capital in that process. And then it's blurry. Then it might be, well, who's going to build the network? Who's going to design the network? Who's going to operate the network? And you could absolutely chunk that out into separate RFPs. So we've done this in a couple of other projects where it's a specific ask. We're asking for specifically the operations and maintenance of a middle mile network. And so therefore we get very specific and actionable responses that we can make a selection, and we can implement that chunk of it. We've also wrote RFPs for the final design and engineering, and we know exactly, roughly what that should be. We've done some preliminary design and engineering work. We know where the vaults are going to be located. We know where a central meet-me point or a CNL location might be located, and therefore we can write a specific RFP and get responses that we can compare and make a decision. Same with construction. So I think you're right, Aaron, that when it's so broad, it's very hard to sift through how to compare the responses because they might be all over the board. But I think you can absolutely chunk it out into smaller phases.
So Diane, on these RFIs, it seems to me as though what you said is exactly what's going on, is someone throws out that they want an entire broadband network built off of one piece of fiber that they own. And it's extremely vague, but I think it leads back to the reason why the city did it. So I'm a city leader, right? I'm the one that's supposed to know what we need, and I'm supposed to be informative to my mayor and so on and so forth. If someone gives me a document, and it's a consultant that would do that, comes into our city, I have a request for proposal or RFI, asking a consultant to come in to help me build this. And at the end of the day, this is what it seems to be going on, because it happens around my community all the time. A one-page document comes to them, to this city leader, that says, you can do this in your town, and it's going to be great. Right? Isn't that what everyone hears? I mean, so then a city leader like myself says, wow, I have this document. This must mean that I can build this, and now I put it out to the world. And so you led to that when you were saying, when you walk in, okay, now who's going to upgrade the network and who's going to do this? So don't you feel that should be the consultant's job from the very beginning to make those statements that give me a path? I had a discussion with Deb earlier that, I really know a lot about building a road. But I don't always know everything that we're doing. I don't know exactly how much stone is underneath the road, or I rely on an engineer to do that for me. So isn't that the consultant's job, don't you feel? So that's what I think leads to these RFIs that are so vague. We have this piece of information that says, hey, this can work. Well, by the way, if it would work, why isn't Time Warner doing it? I mean, I think the RFIs, I don't actually like the RFI idea at all anyways, because it's just too vague. At least the RFP is asking for a real proposal. RFI, as you said, Andrew, is so vague. Is it information? Is it, do they want you to give a dollar figure, or do they just want an answer? So I just think the consultants have a little bit of blame here that things are coming out of them that says, hey, just go build, and they will come. And it's just not that easy, is what I'm saying, I guess.
And one other point is that I have seen a strategy that's effective, that's a little more focused, where two thoughts. One is that if you're doing the RFI for literally an information gathering, make that clear in the RFI so that there's no expectation that it will go to anything else, because then vendors know how to respond to it appropriately. If you have a tailored RFI, I've seen that used as a strategy to shortlist companies, to find, to weed out responses. They will then make a shortlist and issue an RFP to those 2 or 3 companies that are on the shortlist. And I think that can be effective. But again, to be specific and tailored in the RFI, make it clear of what the strategy is, what the timeline is, that at the end of the RFP process, there's an expectation of a contract. But I completely agree that I'm not a fan of the RFI open-ended process. I think it can actually serve to harm a community and derail you, because you get such broad responses back that it can just delay, create confusion, and just really kind of derail a project.
I was just going to answer. So I totally agree with you. To get a one-page document from somebody saying that this is absolutely doable and it's easy and you can do this, there's a lot that goes into municipal planning. It is not easy. If it were easy, it would already been solved. The problem would have been solved. We would have ubiquitous gigabit broadband everywhere. So it's not easy. So to get that type of response, or kind of a laid-back approach from a consulting firm that, oh, we're just going to put this information out there and see what we get, you're not being well advised if that's what a consulting firm is doing. So there's a lot of work that goes into, I think, that process so that it can be effective and it can be a tool that can result in actionable items at the end of the day.
And I mean, I think part of the problem is consultants do a lot of different things, and they consult on a lot of different things. They have a lot of different areas of expertise, but that's not always reflected either in how the RFPs and RFIs are written, and it's not always reflected in what cities are willing to pay for either. So I mean, this was, and I mentioned this Topeka. They actually they had an RFP for a consultant to help them with an RFI and then an RFP, and it was all built into one sort of solicitation, which in one sense I thought was really good, because like it sounded kind of like you're saying, we need someone to hold our hand through this whole process. We don't really know what we're doing. We know we want to do something. We've got some budget allocated to it, so we're going to pay for this help. We're not just sort of fishing. I wasn't quite sure why all the steps they outlined were needed, and so I ended up writing a response, working with Stan Adams, who had kind of helped prepare some of the Kansas State broadband work. He worked for NTIA, was their state broadband rep. And it actually, I mean, this was one of the kind of confusing things too, but one of the things they were asking for in this RFP was, I think, validating Stan's work and the work. So it's like, okay, we've got all this information, we need some work validating this, and then these other things. And what I told them, and it was more of a letter almost, and I wrote them back, and I was like, listen, there's ways that I could help you. Here's what we can do and what we've done in Kansas City. I mean, I kind of know the community engagement piece. I know enough people who work in the broadband industry and who do different pieces of this to kind of think about how you can find the right partners who can help you align the stuff that you want to do from an engineering perspective with your community vision. But that's not really what you're asking for. I think it's maybe kind of what you want. It might be what you need, but that's not how it's sort of spec'd out. And what I don't have is an engineering expertise. I could bring in engineering. I know a lot of engineering companies, but I don't have that. I don't have the build expertise. I don't have the design expertise, and I don't think, that you've got all these baked into one proposal. I don't know how you're going to build pick your, I mean, if you're looking for respondents to this who have an engineering company picked out that's going to do, sort of phase 3 of your, or phase 5, I think it was 5 phases of process they had all baked in. I don't know that that's the right approach either, because you've got enough groundwork to do, and it needs to be done intelligently, and that's going to affect who you might pick as an engineer or, you know, business modeling consultant or all these other things. So, you know, I don't necessarily fault them for that. I don't know for sure how you would have written it better. We didn't get the project and weren't talked to about it. So, you know, it's interesting to me how that all plays out. And they picked, I think, an engineering firm. And so I kind of wonder, as I see that, how are they going to do, you know, the community impact piece for you up front, and how's that going to happen? And maybe you have that capacity in City Hall, and you've got people that you feel are really good about that. And if you do, I think that's fine. But it was, I don't know, it was an interesting insight sort of to see that process.
Can I give like some behind the scenes view of what a municipality goes through and maybe the challenge as a consultant?
And let me ask a question that's
Okay.
actually going to lead to that answer, if you
perfect.
don't mind, so that because what recommendations, so it directly relates to what you're talking about, do you have for communities regarding the integration of community engagement and visioning, as well as finance and engineering in this process? In other words, how do you lay that out? Where does it start, and how do you move forward with it? And I'll just mention that after this, we'll take questions, okay? So.
Let me just kind of give a view into what is a big challenge, I think, as a consultant. So we're engaged often with municipalities or counties that want to come up with a broadband strategy and plan. And what is really the biggest challenge is trying to figure out what's the appetite for investment that a city would like to make, and what does the city want to do? Because oftentimes the city doesn't know. They don't know what's possible. They don't know where they could potentially get funding. They don't know what it will look like. They know that they don't want to become the service provider. Maybe that's what they know. But all of the other questions that I often refer to as the little red hen questions. Who's going to pay for the network? Who's going to build it? Who's going to design it? Do you want to operate it? What kind of operating model do you want? They don't know the answer to that. So one of the biggest challenges as a consultant is to give them enough information that they can start making some decisions on what feels right in terms of appetite. What is the level of investment that feels right for this community? And what assets do they have that they can bring to the table? That's the big homework part of it. You can go through the homework, you can develop the design and engineering, identify what the capital costs look like for each of the models, and what the financial implications may be before you do an RFP process for a public-private partnership to get a better result. But it is really difficult as a consultant to know what does the city want and what appetite do they have, and sifting through what levels of investment and infrastructure build out, what that means from a financial implication and model. You asked about community engagement, and I think community engagement can be effective because you definitely want to provide an avenue for constituents to engage and provide feedback and be part of the process. But you also might want to think about when you engage them. So do you want to engage them early on when we don't even have a little iota of a plan? Or do you want to engage the community when the city or the county has an idea about what they'd like to do and what the appetite is and what level of investment they would like to see potentially? Maybe at that point, when there's a preliminary plan, the community could engage at that point.
Other comments?
So I think it's important in this to understand what your community needs are, and a big piece of that is community engagement. And also understand what the market can support. So for example, where I live in Superior, we have multiple choices of providers. We have that serve every household in our town. We have CenturyLink, we have Comcast, there's other options available as well. And the town is looking into determining whether or not they want to build a municipal network on top of this, where you already have multiple choices. And it's a difficult question. Really, the one question you need to ask here before you go through any of the other pieces, before you even approach community engagement, before you even get to financing, is can you support a third provider in the town? Because if you can't, then there's no sense in going forward. And if you can, you need to know that before you go down the road as well. So I think community engagement is important. It's understanding what your needs are, what your goals are, and making sure that your procurement processes match up with that.
Yeah, I the procurement is a really good point, because procurement doesn't typically think they need to pay for that kind of stuff. I mean, and cities think that they can do it, and again, you know, some of them can, but so this is one of the challenges that we face. You know, we kind of have done this playbook. We've developed a pretty good reputation in Kansas City for, you know, doing effective community engagement. And a lot of people, you know, from other cities come, oh, this is great. You know, we'd love to see you do this in our city. But the RFPs and the RFIs in the broadband space that they put out don't ask for the stuff that we do. And you know, kind of going back to my market research days, you know, the first question almost always to any client was, you know, what's your budget, right? And how much are you trying to spend? And if you're trying to do a product development strategy that, you know, is really kind of looking, you know, doing ethnographic research at how people are using your current product right now, I mean, you could easily, you know, there are projects where you could design a $250,000 9-month project or a $30,000 sort of short, you know, quantitative questionnaire. And in some sense, you know, how cities think about community engagement is a similar way, right? So that's kind of in some ways a separate issue from engineering versus community engagement, but cities don't not ask for this, right? So I mean, I can imagine a process where we can set up, you know, a whole working board and recruit, you know, institutional partners from your city, and you know, get sort of mayor approval, and you do some, you know, full-day workshops. Sometimes you want to get some press sizzle out of it. Sometimes you need to, you know, really catalyze people's imaginations. Sometimes you want to hold a whole series of workshops out in neighborhoods and really, you know, kind of get dialogue going. Sometimes you need to get more quantitative feedback about people's kind of use case. And I'm not really talking about sort of demand surveys like, you know, do you want to pay $50 for gigabit? But the more sort of what, you know, how do you get people excited about this idea, right? So you can do that at a wide range of price points. But one, that's never specified. 2, cities don't really budget for that kind of stuff. And 3, they think they can do it. It's kind of like surveys. Everybody thinks they can write a survey. You know, you got SurveyMonkey, and you can put it out there. I think Doug made this point and you were talking about demand surveys. But you know, to really do this work effectively, it helps to have people who do it professionally. And I mean, this was the Fort Collins you know, proposal that we did. I think the feedback that we got was, oh, this is great. You know, we love what you're talking about, and you really get the community, and you've done your homework on what Fort Collins is about. But man, why is it so expensive? It's like, well, because we're talking about sending people to your community and actually spending time there and talking to people and getting to know them over a long period of time and being able to, you know, build up the relationship side of this. And that's not something that city governments pay for, especially if you're coming in from out of town. You know, and I get it. So I don't know what the solution is, but that's sort of the dilemma anyway for me.
You come in.
So I guess I'm going to be a little shorter and sweeter than everyone else about it, but the community engagement is only done, in my mind, through the political will. So the very first thing that has to happen is a councilman or a mayor or some community leader has to say, investigate this. So if anyone's talking to people out there that don't have that investigation process going, I do think it is an uphill battle. It has to start with someone that is going to, for lack of a better term, stick their neck out a little bit, that this needs to be done in the community. Now, to answer one thing about having 3 in one community, I think what we found in our community, we have 3 with us now. And the people are tired of customer service, is what they're tired of. We promote, this whole group, and including me, we promote speeds. But speeds really don't matter that much. Everyone's relatively happy with their speeds, believe it or not. I'm selling it. And I know what my community is saying. Hey, it's great that you're offering a gig, but really I'm getting by with a 10x2 right now. I'm not really unhappy with that. What I'm unhappy with is it's down every other day. Or the installer didn't come out when he was supposed to. So that's where I think the communities do the best work, we know the people, right? We know all of our residents. We've had to deal with multiple issues. We should be able to figure out how to make them happy. In my case, the installer is not allowed to be late. If he's going to be late, he calls me so I can be there. That's the type of effort that the cities generally do anyways. The incumbents are not going to do that type of work. So I really think it just starts with the political will, and that doesn't answer the question very well, but if the mayors aren't in or the councilmen aren't in, it's not going to help that the IT guy wants to do it or the business development guy wants to do it. Business development guy comes here today, yeah, he's going to go back to his community and say, this is the greatest thing ever. He doesn't have enough. Somehow we need to be able to involve them in these meetings.
You bring up a really good point. So community engagement could be used to find out what the problem is that we're trying to solve. And sometimes consultants have this idea of what the problem is, and until they do some engagement with the community, maybe that problem that they think it is not really what the actual problem is. I'll give an example. In Grand Junction, we did some community engagement, and I did think initially going in that, okay, the problem is abundant broadband. We don't have abundant broadband. But really what happened in the community engagement process was people said, we have abundant broadband, but we have to pay for it. So Charter and CenturyLink will build fiber to our business, but they then charge us for that fiber installation. So as a business owner, I have to spend $70,000 to get fiber to my business establishment. I don't have that in my budget. I can't do that. And then once it's here, then I have to pay $4,500 a month for a gig. So the problem wasn't that affordable broadband was available. The problem really was that it wasn't affordable, and the mechanism to get it was not sustainable. So I think community engagement can be used to really identify what the problem is that we're trying to solve, and that can be an effective tool.
Okay, can we please join me in thanking our wonderful panelists. Thank you.